We're going to talk about life in the green zone, a case for self-compassion and your three-part brain. Okay, so a lot of times we have a hard time feeling compassion for ourselves, and there's a part of us that argues that we shouldn't feel compassion for ourselves. So I'm going to do my very best to make a case for your mind for self-compassion so that you will see that how important it is, how meaningful it is, how you uplifting yourself resonates out and uplifts others around you. And so it's core to having great relationships is to also have self-compassion for oneself. Now we can define compassion as care and concern for well-being and empathy for suffering. And I think that this touching on this, that we all suffer, and that actually being a human being entails a lot of really challenging experiences that are very difficult, that I know you've all experienced, along with the joys. There is this yin yang of life. And so compassion is a beautiful phrase that speaks to the empathy that we all have for the suffering that people experience. And self-compassion we can look at as being on your own side, right? Being in support of your own well-being, being in support of your goodness, being support of, realistically in support too, taking into account the circumstances and the challenges that you face that are part of what make you imperfect. What make us all imperfect is facing those challenges. I mean, I think the whole game here is facing challenges as an imperfect person and slowly whittling ourselves into the being that we want to be. But then also thinking of yourself as someone to care for and treat with respect, someone who's worthy of care, right? So we want to really allow ourselves to realize, one of the techniques that's often done is people are encouraged to find a picture of themselves when they were a child, and realize that we all have this innocence within us, right? And we all have this need and attempt, and we're doing the best we can given the circumstances and resources we have available. This was a quote by Maya Angelou that I really love. Everyone's doing the best they can. And when they know how to do better, they do better. So why is self-compassion a good thing? Sometimes people raise questions like, shouldn't I be down on myself when I do things wrong? And what is the critical voice in my mind? And why is self-compassion so hard? So we're going to look at some of those as we go along here. Self-compassion is hard because of the negativity bias of our brain sways our thoughts as well. So it steers our thoughts into critique, and it'll do this for ourselves as well as others. So our brain, first of all, it automatically judges things. It's like it's a default position to judge things, our brain, to make a distinction. I like this and I don't like that. I like coffee, I don't like tea. I like the mountains more than the ocean. I like whatever the preferences are, I like this. So we have this pleasure pain system that breaks things down into very simple I like and I don't like categories. And we tend to extrapolate and apply those categories in areas where we don't need to apply them in such a black and white way, right? When we're judgmental of others, for example, we can be I don't like that person, when if we took a few steps back, we might find there are aspects of them that we do like, and there are aspects of them that we don't like. So there's more gray in there. And the negativity bias will tend us to lean toward the negative part of our judgments. So hyper focus on and hyper inflate, really expand, or inflate is really a good term, like inflating a balloon, inflating the negative events and deflating the positive events. So this negativity bias that came from survival adaptation, right? Because we need to groove in things that threaten us more than how nice a flower smells, right? We need to be more aware that this is the place in the path where we spotted the mountain lion than we do that this is the place in the path where we smelled a really nice flower, because the latter is more related to our survival. And so we groove that in more, but that extrapolates to the way that our thinking happens too. So we have this vulnerability. And our brain, you may not realize this, but your brain is the most complex single thing in the entire known universe. And this, every brain is different. And it's because the neural connections are different. Every time I look at the beautiful oak trees around here, I think about the brain, because it's how all the neurons are connected, and each of those oak trees branches is unique, and all of our neurons in this brain are connected in different ways. But our brain is actually not just a single thing, and learning a little bit about how our brain is structured and work really helps us to begin to be gentle with ourselves, to take it a little bit easier on ourselves. You can see here we have all these interesting structures in the middle that we're not used to really thinking about as our brain. And then there's this curly gray matter on the outside that we are used to thinking of as our brain. So we're going to be looking at the monument. These structures in the middle here are actually involved in fight or flight, and also the core emotions that dogs and children feel like, and that we feel as well. But you see really expressed in dogs and children, because this is the core emotional structures of mad, sad, glad, afraid, excited, attachment, caring, all here in the middle of the brain. This outside front of the brain behind the forehead is where our thoughts are. And so our thoughts interface with our emotions, interface with our thoughts, with all these different kinds of neural connections that are built through our experiences over time. And that wiring is what we find ourselves with. Poof, here I am with, I'm pre-wired in X way from all of my experiences and some of my biological predispositions and things like that. So now what, right? Now we can begin to do self-directed neuroplasticity and begin to wire ourselves. And we learn that it takes a little time to build that highway, but we can. Now, one of the interesting things is that our brain runs through, one thing I wanted to point out is that because children and dogs don't have a lot of thoughts, what you experience from them is mostly this limbic middle of the brain activity expressed through their being, right? Their emotional selves, happiness or anger or jealousy or sorrow or excitement or love, right? You see that, but you don't see it modulated. This part of the brain, that's what happens. Kids around 4, 5, 6, they develop the ability to think a bigger vocabulary. That all gets wired here in the prefrontal lobes. And then that wiring starts to work with this wiring in the middle of the brain. And so part of the reason we don't have memories from early childhood is because these narrative storytelling structures, when I was 5, this happened, they don't start to develop until we're a little older, right? 4, 5, and 6. Logic doesn't kick in until 6. So we're fantasy creatures until about 6. And so what's happening is the memory sequences in the emotional part of the brain and the sensory parts of the brain, which are about right here. This part right here is the sensory part. So we might have an emotional feeling and a visual memory from a certain smell of food that was cooked when we were very young, but there won't be a whole lot of thoughts and stories about it unless we saw pictures and then we narrated those pictures when we were a little bit older. Does that make sense? So this is why this thinking part of our brain, and what happens is that the emotions influence the thoughts. So when you're having negative emotions, your thinking starts to become darker, and it's like putting on darker colored glasses. And when we're having anxious thoughts, this thinking part of the brain starts to sort of contract and become less flexible, less creative, less imaginative, and we kind of we contract in and get locked down more to what's happened in the past as a projection of the future instead of new possibilities, growth mindset. We start moving into a fixed mindset with fear and anxiety rather than a growth mindset. So one of the things to notice is that we're a walking brain, that this is the nervous system. And through the nervous system, our brain runs through our entire body, right? So it's all interconnected. There is no non-connection, right? So it's a two-way dialogue. So how we feel in our body, and digestion has been shown to be, powerfully influences, because serotonergic neurons are stimulated by the digestive system that increase serotonin in the brain. So basically, and serotonin is that neurotransmitter that enables us to feel like, everything's okay and we can deal with life. So diet, definitely, it's one of the reasons we'll look at diet and here and food and how we can sort of tweak ourselves, through small incremental changes into healthier and healthier eating that will influence our brain. But we want to approach it from a multiplicity of directions, right? So from food, from how we think, from taking care of our emotions and things like that. But the basic message here is that you can see these neural structures. This is your nervous system that you're looking at, as well as some of your spinal cord, which is also part of your nervous system. So the way our brain is organized, we map our brain in different ways. And those different kinds of mapping tell us different things. They like paint different pictures of this most complex single thing in the known universe. So let's start by realizing that it's not, it's not super, super simple, but we can use some simple models to gain great clarity as long as we understand that they're simplistic and that we have to use multiple ones. And one of the basic models we use is the 3-part brain, which was one of the earlier models proposed in the 1990s, Paul MacLean at the Mind and Brain Institute, when we first started doing PET scans and MRIs, which enabled scientists to be able to see what's happening in the brain when it's moving, when we're thinking about something, what the brain's doing. Like when you're solving a math problem, what's lit up in the brain. That's what the MRIs show us. And from that, they're able to create some maps of the brain, what parts of the brain do what things. And so we have this 3-part brain referred to as the reptilian brain. And then the middle of the brain I was showing you with kids and monkeys is the limbic system. And then the neocortex or cerebral cortex is the outermost gray area part of the brain. So the first breakdown of the brain is this idea of having a reptilian, limbic, and neocortex. So let's look at what that means. The reptilian brain is actually very much like a brain like the alligators have, lizards have, and it consists of these structures: the top of the spinal cord. This is the cerebellum. You don't have to remember these parts. You just want to remember these 3 parts: reptilian cortex, limbic system, and neocortex, right? And prefrontal lobe. So the hindbrain, it's also referred to as, and that's because it's the same brain parts that lizards and alligators have. They're basically for automatic movement and very simple functioning, running digestive and breathing systems. Very much runs on autopilot. Also core to fight or flight, particularly in alligators and lizards. And then on top of that, the brain, as it evolves and mammals are developed, and mammals have this part, these brain structures in purple, called the limbic system. And limbic system means system because it's a whole system of organs that interact and work together that are related to emotions, memories, and habits. The emotional center of your brain and the memory center of your brain, the hippocampus, are right next to each other. And you could say the memory center is sort of the memory generator, and then neurons are sent throughout the brain and wired throughout the brain of memories, because memories are cross-file. But it's sort of like, you could say the hippocampus is like the card catalog, and it is right here on the outer side of the limbic system, the memory system. So right next to emotions is memory. So we are very tuned into our emotions. And then here is, of course, thinking. And this blue part of the brain is the neocortex, particularly the prefrontal lobes right here in the front. And that is thinking and reason and creativity and rationalization and language and thought and all that kind of stuff come from these prefrontal lobes, as well as self-discipline and impulse control. And this part of the brain is very much like a muscle. And it wears out, it gets tired. So we get tired exerting our will. And when we get tired, we sort of regress back. Freud talked about regression, and here we see it. Like when you get worn out at the end of the day, you might notice that you're more vulnerable to those sweets in the cabinet than when you're not so tired. And so you may sorry, I just realized I have to plug my computer in. It's going to go dead, and I don't want to lose you guys because I didn't plug my computer in. Did you hear that? So anyway, you may find that you're more impulsive in this part of the brain. Think toddlers and dogs, playful, right? Impulsive parts of the brain, pleasure, pain, core emotions, and the impulse control say, no, I'm not going to have cookies for breakfast, is not always on. When this part gets tired because we've used our focused, attentive, thinking part of the brain all day, we have less impulse control. So there's all kinds of ways to hack that. So here's a more detailed model of our three-point brain. And you can see here we have the reptilian parts of the brain, instinctual behaviors that are related to life support and basic fight or flight and interactive. So alligators and lizards, they're basic creatures, right? They are all about survival and the basic survival mechanisms. And interestingly, they don't bond or attach or love. They become familiar, like reptiles will become familiar, but they're not going to love you, not like your dog does, and or horses or other mammals. So this is the limbic system here in the middle of the brain, and this is shared by all mammals who are social animals. So this is a social set of structures that give us the capacity to engage in herd and group interaction. And so we have another more dealing with interacting with a bunch of different beings within a tribe and figuring out, things like hierarchies and pecking orders and attachment and bonding and caring and organization and communication. That's limbic stuff. So that's why your emotions are very tied into your social connections and your social interactions, because it's all part of the limbic brain. And then the prefrontal lobes. Now, this cerebral cortex part of the brain back here is vision, and here is your senses, all your sense organs and things like that. So you'll see that like rats and dogs and cats, they all have this curly gray matter that's handling vision. A big part of our brain is done in vision, and it's in the back of the brain, which is because everything's stretched out. You can see it's right next to the reptilian core, but these structures were added, like doing housing additions over evolutionary time. So we have the mammal animals emerging, primates emerging, and so on, and that's the limbic system. But all of them have a little bit of this curly gray mass around them that goes to about here, stops here, this whole back area. Okay, and that's related to vision and then your sensory motor cortex. So this is movement and senses, hear, smell, see, taste. I think it's sensing and movement. So, but then this prefrontal lobe area right in the front, this is another growth of the cerebral cortex connected to the limbic system that enables all these things that we consider the higher functions of the human mind, right? Thinking, planning, dreaming, imagining, and creating. It also helps to modulate. We can wire neurons here. When you learn self-control, you're actually wiring neurons from the prefrontal lobes to calm the limbic system. So you can see that, these are longer slides for each one. You can see that when we're in the reptilian cortex, part of our brain, this is when you react immediately to a situation like an emergency. Now, this part of your brain is always active, but because it's regulating your breath, digestion, sleep, and things like that. But it's also stimulated when you feel like primally threatened, like and being cut off in traffic is an example of your reptilian cortex part of your brain being, and so you'll feel a little bit of that surge of fight or flight. But then you'll move forward here and think about it and start thinking, that jerk, yada, 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 because the thoughts are following the surge of fight or flight. But what we can do is take a breath. Let's take a breath. And realize and say, relax, 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 relax. And what we're doing is we're soothing the reptile inside ourselves. See, you take care of your own systems. You're the master regulator who can sort of the Obi-Wan Kenobi and the behind all this, who can soothe all of your neurological systems. And so you're calming the reptile, your inner alligator, your inner lizard. All right, these are the structures that are called out from this that are part of the reptilian, and this is the spinal cord. And there's the medulla pons and reticular formation are the main and the cerebellum are the main structures in here, and they're related to regulating sleeping and dreaming. That's the medulla and the pons. Circadian rhythms, which reptiles also have. This is related to coordinating movement down here in the cerebellum. It also does some other things that we're just starting to figure out. We're not sure. And then the reticular formation is a little organ in here that influences our sense of space, knowing where we are in space. So these are the reptilian. And then we have the limbic system. You can see the emotion coming out of this dog's face. That's the emotional system here. There's a bunch of structures. I mentioned the hippocampus. That's these red ones here. That's the memory system right next to all these other structures. And one we'll look at a lot is called the amygdala right here. There's one on each side. It's about the size of an almond. And it's basically the center of the fight or flight response, but not just fight or flight, also passion. Like that you love something is also an amygdala activation. So it tends to be involved with strong emotions, but its number one job, just like your brain's number one job, considers itself to be survival. And we have to teach our brain that we can relax and shift from a survival orientation really to a thriving orientation. But this middle set of structures is limbic, and limbic means ring, and you just have to memorize. You'll start hearing, this is common vernacular now used in even TV shows and on podcasts and stuff, talking about the limbic system and the amygdala in particular. You'll hear those terms a lot. The limbic emotions are universal amongst mammals. So you can see the similar, and we also express them similarly on our face. So you can immediately tell from the facial expression what the emotional is. And the facial expression is very similar, right? This is baring the lips and furrowing the nose, wrinkling up at the nose and furrowing at the brow, create the anger. And then fear or worry is wrinkles above the brow, eyebrows pushed together, right? Eyes cast down. So you can see that there are similar facial expressions cross species as expressions of the limbic system in mammals, all right, which is really interesting. So we have this core emotional system, and you can see here that what happens is because, you have a child like this child, okay, who is worried and scared. And he could have come in biologically pre-wired, because we do have some predispositions to be slightly fearful. But then if he is raised in a fearful house, then where things are always threatening and scary, then his amygdala will become, we could almost call it inflamed. It actually is larger. And it's like hypersensitized by the frightening environment. And so then he becomes a young adult and he feels anxiety, right? So whereas a person who has a slight amount of fear, like this little child, say he's born slightly predisposed to fear, so his amygdala is already slightly sensitive, then and then he's raised in a very secure environment. And it's not just the home, it's also the things like the school environment, experience with peers and things like that as you grow up, because these experiences build and grow on each other. So so he has a secure environment, then that amygdala can calm down. And we know that we can do lots of things as adults because of self-directed neuroplasticity to help that amygdala soothe and calm down. And that's what this class is all about, starting with giving you some knowledge, arming you with tools and knowledge about your brain so you understand how it all works. So now some quiz questions. You ready? Here we go. All right, I'm going to ask you to do a matching game. So the first question is, when we are experiencing road rage, what part of our brain is first activated? Joe, go ahead and type your answers in the chat. When we are experiencing road rage, what part of our brain is first activated? Okay, really good. Okay, then when we have cognitive thoughts, and cognitive means thinking, when we think about, excellent, you're doing right on, correct. Great job, you guys. The R complex, or the reptilian brain. Great job. So now when we think about what's going on, when we think about, wait a minute, that is a reptilian response. I can pet the lizard, soothe the lizard, calm myself down. I'm going to take a deep breath. And I'm going to relax, relax, relax. When we have thoughts like that, or we can have the automatic thoughts that happen, are things like, because they're stimulated from the emotion and we don't realize that, we just think that this thought is correct because we're having it, Whereas we're going to learn, one of the things of cognitive behavior therapy is to look at those thoughts and determine whether they're realistic and accurate or not. It's called cognitive appraisal. So when we think about our thoughts, what part of the brain is activated? When we think about how we're feeling, when we have thoughts about it. Good, exactly. You're right on, Jenna. So we can either think, now what's going to happen is, because road rage, fight or flight, and alligators get mad when something gets in its way of its goal too, right? It has a sort of just a little primal rage reaction. And we learn in childhood from models and from how we all have these, the terrible twos are all about these primal rage reactions, and how well it was modeled. If we freaked out or had a temper tantrum when we were in our terrible twos, when we're feeling tons of intense emotion from this kind of the part of the brain, but nothing from the frontal lobes to help us calm it down, that has to come from the parents. And so we have a temper tantrum, and then our parents have a temper tantrum, then we don't know how to calm down these emotions that are coming from our system. And so that it just gets passed down because nobody knows how to calm down these emotions, these powerful emotions that are coming from the system. And the way that we use thought to calm it down, but we have to be aware of this, because the first emotion that will happen is something that validates our survival defensiveness, like that jerk, right? How dare they? Right? And then that just makes us madder, which is also connected for us humans in the limbic system, because we're not just reptiles. We also have these other brain structures, 1, 2, 3. And so how we think about it. And one of the things about going to green is realizing when we have a hijack or an impulse coming from these more primitive brain structures, and we gentle it, because these are actually a separate system. An example of it being a separate system is, I tell a little story about like somebody wanting, this system is like food and things, but the limbic brain system, this is basic structures and survival stuff. But these two systems interrelate a lot. Like, for example, you tell yourself you're going to study that night. That's a prefrontal lobe decision, right? I'm going to study tonight. And then somebody calls you and said, let's go party. Well, the limbic system wants to play, right? It can be almost associated with your inner child or Freud's id. So the limbic system wants to play, wants to increase pleasure. So now you've got an inner conflict, whether to stay home and study or go out and party. Stay home and study or go out. And those are the days going out and partying, right? They'll come back. They'll come back. This is one thing about these days. It's a really great way to get us to slow down. Let's take a breath. For all the pain and anguish of this time, one of the silver linings is that we are learning to slow down. Really good, you guys. Really good. So basically you have a conflict between the two sides of the brain, which one will win, right? So you can see that we can flip. Here's another example. You walk into a room and you're attracted to somebody that you see on the far side of the room. That's the reptilian brain. That's just reptilian. Sort of, we use the term lust in kind of a derogatory way, but it's sort of a primitive function. So you're just feeling that you don't know if you like that person or not. You just feel an immediate sense of chemistry. But then you turn to your partner who you walked in with, and you feel great warmth and affection and connection to them because you guys have been together since you were sophomores in high school. And so you feel very fond toward each other, and that's the limbic system. And then your brain thinks, but maybe we should start dating other people because we're going to go to different colleges. And that's your prefrontal lobes. So you can see that these brain structures each have sort of distinct agendas, distinct orientations. If anybody saw the movie Inside Out, what you're seeing is the limbic system in action, joy and fear and anger, characterized, personified as like beings, but showing that each of them has a different agenda. In the same way, these 3 different parts of your brain have a different agenda. And when the prefrontal lobes are tired, these other parts of the brain are the ones that can step forward. Now, that's what advertisings are trying to get to, is these parts of the brain. Advertising is not trying to get to your prefrontal lobes, your higher order thinking brain. Well, some of the more refined ads are. and one might say ethical ads are, but basically most of the ads are trying to get you to a more impulsive part of your brain to get to buy the stuff. Okay, so what part of your brain is active when you're feeling very strong emotion? When you're feeling a strong feeling of, say, excitement or happiness or fear. Good. You guys got this down. See, you're already doing neuroscience. Yes, the limbic system. You are awesome. I am so impressed with you. See, look, you're nailing it. You got it. Okay, so we have the R complex, we have the limbic system. Remember, it's a socially oriented system. Notice it shrinks time and space. It shrinks time and space. Notice how you can immediately sense what's going on. You can read this animal's mind because of the emotional expression coming out of its face. And what that means is that we shrink space because this dog can be 20 feet away from you and you can immediately tell what it's feeling from the emotional expression on its face. Same with these critters. Where are they? Oh, I lost them. These critters, okay? They could be 40 feet away from you and you know just what they are feeling. It's a kind of mind reading. It's absolutely fascinating when we think about it that way, the miraculousness of it. Okay, so the third part of it is this wonderful prefrontal lobes, our blessing and our curse, because this is the part of your mind that you can't get to stop thinking at night, but it's also the one that leads us to creativity, imagination, planning. Many of you are artists, musicians. This part of the brain is lighting up in an incredibly beautiful way when you're exercising those things. This is self-discipline, it's impulse control. This is also the ability for us to have basically create a virtual reality program in our mind where we can imagine the future and imagine possibilities. All come from these prefrontal lobes. This is right behind your forehead. So it does all these things. And we also have self-reflection and awareness comes from all these things. From all these things come from the prefrontal lobes, activation of the prefrontal lobes, thinking. But they can also kind of get stuck. So each of these systems that we have, the reptilian system, the limbic system, the prefrontal lobe system, they can all get out of whack. They can all get imbalanced. So one of our goals is to help them be in balance so that we can feel better and function better and use our entire brain. The PFC is short for prefrontal cortex, and that's often a little acronym that's used. Prefrontal means in the front, front. And it's also often referred to as the executive center of the brain because it handles all these more executive style functions like planning your day, prefrontal lobes, learning something new, prefrontal lobes, dreaming of something you want, prefrontal lobes. So let's all take a breath and relax. What you're doing is you're relaxing the nervous system of your body and you're taking care of this is a kind of self-care with these deep breaths. You're soothing your own nervous system. You're soothing your own inner alligator or inner lizard or inner gecko. So let's do a prefrontal lobe exercise in the chat now and just write down one thing that you would either like to create today or make happen today or accomplish today. One thing that you have on your mind that you would like to do today. A plan that you have, I want to get this done, or I want to go for a walk. All of these kinds of, I want to make sure I get a walk in with my dog. I want to make sure I eat 3 servings of vegetables. So what is one thing that you want to create or plan or make happen today? And what you're doing is you're activating your prefrontal lobes and oh, I love it. Learn a new song. I hope you play the ukulele sometime for us. So I want to encourage all of you, everyone, to share your art, your photos. If there's a place where you would rather draw a response to a reflection question or anything like that, feel free to bring your creativity into our course and your uniqueness and your fun and your playfulness. Okay, right on, drink more water. A great way to drink more water that I do is I put a glass out that I really love to look at, and I I drink it, a glass of water at least 3 times a day, just by itself, just water. I know you're supposed to do it more than that, but that at least gets 3 times in it. These are absolutely wonderful. Okay, so you're also tuning into your intention, your intentional system. And this is one of the higher parts of your system. You notice that you can't always make your intentional system, doesn't always rule, right? We'll say we want to do these things and sometimes we don't do them, right? And it's because these other systems step in, right? We'll be looking at some of that. But your intentional system is very valuable, very important. It's the part of you that I think many of us most associated with our true selves. It's part of us that we associate with our true self. And so now you understand why sometimes we can't achieve only by the intentional system, because we have these other systems that we have to interact with as well, and they all have an energy and a power. Now, nestled deep in the limbic system is this thing I mentioned to you before called amygdala. And everybody try saying that word out loud. Amygdala. Amygdala. Just try it. Amygdala. It actually comes from the Latin almond. These are almond size. There's 2 of them on each side, and this is the hippocampus, the part that's involved in emotional memory in the limbic system part of your brain, right? The emotional center part of the brain, primal emotions in particular. And it's the center of the fight or flight. So it's constantly scanning the environment for threat. And it can become hypersensitized and it can become relaxed. And meditations and guided meditations help it become relaxed. A really great way to help your amygdala if it's become hypersensitive. You want to approach it from a multiplicity of directions, right? It's like the same with your body. You don't want to do just one exercise. You want to do a reasonable variety of exercises to strengthen different muscles and so on. Well, similarly, to soothe anxiety, you want to approach it from different directions. But one really excellent method that is sort of something you can do in the background other than let's pause and take a breath and release, relax, 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 relax. Really good, good one. Take another breath. Is to listen to guided meditations when you go to sleep at night. And I'll post some because what they're doing is they're wiring through suggestion a new way of relaxing in the evening, new thoughts rather than scary thoughts. Because remember, what we repeat builds a stronger neural highway. So we want to gentle those neural highways, right? So more about the amygdala, which is always scanning and can become sensitized and become calmed. It can become soothed. So we inherit an amygdala. Here we are today, feeling the way we feel today. And this is all an inheritance. And we've gained a vast, I can't emphasize enough how much this is a turning point time, that you're living in a pioneering time, and you yourself are a pioneer in this time with having access to this kind of knowledge. We've never had so much information to help us tinker with ourselves, to help us wire ourselves. That's what self-directed neuroplasticity is, on a mental level, influencing the way we think, feel, and behave. And it doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it does, but it's the power of incremental change, which is amazing. The power of a little bit each day. That's the idea of atomic habits, a little tiny bit each day. But if we keep it up, we see big changes over even relatively small blocks of time. So we have seen larger amygdalas are correlated with things like bipolar and anxiety disorders. And what we're seeing is more inflammation that can be calmed. And then small amygdalas with those who have psychopathic traits. Okay, and an amygdala hijack is when we have, and this is what we would refer to as a red brain versus a green brain. And this happens on a scale, right? Just like a volume control of your radio. So amygdala hijack is when the middle part of our brain abducts all the blood flow, and it takes the blood flow from the prefrontal lobes. So we're not able to think very well when we get too stressed or too angry. You know, we get this part of our brain kind of gets flooded with all the energy, and we're put in a position where we want to fight, flight, or freeze, right? Fight and flight and there's no freezing here. There's just either fighting or flying or freezing. So the stress brain is like a red brain. And you can see here that it's got the CEO, or the executive function's been turned off. So we don't have much impulse control. So we become really impulsive. We feel this intense sense of urgency, which is really this state of being was more designed for running away from a lion, tiger, or bear than dealing with the complexities of modern life. But it gets stimulated all the time by modern life anyway. We get feelings of threat, where, the stress brain gets activated under feelings of threat. So the idea is to reduce our threat sensitivity, right? The idea of reducing threat sensitivity. And that's what learning how to speak to ourselves differently can do, right? Exuding and practicing self-compassion, practicing relaxation meditations, and listening to things like mantras and things like that. So developing a different relationship with ourselves and the systems in our body, right? So this is why when you lose your temper or get really angry at someone, you'll notice that we follow all these behavior patterns. We feel this immediateness and impulsiveness, and we feel an intense sense of urgency, like we have to solve this right now, when really what's happening is that the higher order thinking parts of our brain are shut off. So the best thing to do is to relax and calm our system, get this part of our brain back online, and then return to the matter at hand and address it. We become consumed and ruminate on the threat. Our thinking becomes simplistic, narrow-minded, uncreative, and non-strategic. No PFC, no prefrontal cortex, or prefrontal lobes is another word for it. We're not as able to accurately read other people's emotions or see their points of view, right? So we're contracted into the threat system. And so we've lost a lot of our higher order functions, and negative emotions to stimulate negative memories. So this slide is just simply pointing out that more stress equals less prefrontal lobe function, right? And this is partly because of the kinds of hormones that are reduced into our body, like cortisol and adrenaline, that pull the blood flow to the middle of the system. And then all the energy goes to our hands and legs to fight or run, or we feel frozen, right? We feel sort of paralyzed or stuck is another way, right? So as this activation increases, and again, you can use a radio dial and you could say, well, I'm feeling a number 2 stress versus a number 10 stress. If we're at a 7, 8, 9, 10 stress, we're progressively, like you get progressively drunk when you drink, you get progressively more hijacked the more the stress goes up. And this pushes cognitive appraisals, which means what we attribute the cause of something to in a negative direction, so we get into this thing where everything's bad. So negative emotions lead to negative thoughts. That's something that we tended to, we talked about earlier. It stimulates the negative thought system because they're wired that way. So you'll also think of, like, when you're mad at your friend or partner, suddenly you can remember all the things that you don't like that they did. And when you're happy with your partner, suddenly you can remember all the good things that you like about them, right? But so this cross wiring, it's interesting to be aware that our brain is wired that way. And this is one of those things that we have to work to offset. When we're in a negative state, we're going to cast sort of a negative cognitive shadow on our interpretation of things. And that's something that with awareness, we can help to offset. So let's watch this in action. This is Navy SEALs training from red to green. And this is actually 2 video clips, and I'm going to skip to the second one. But here we go. It'll sort of give you a feel for how this all works.
And the processing of emotions.
Within the limbic system are the amygdala, 2 nuggets of...
Here we go.
The limbic system.
This is from the History Channel.
And this is very important in the processing of emotions.
Within the limbic system are the amygdala, 2 nuggets of tissue, 1 in each half of the brain. They are no bigger than a fingernail, yet they are the brain's central command center for our emotional reactions. One of the simplest and strongest of these is fear, a primal emotion we all share.
If you had to pick one brain region that was most important in fear, it would be the amygdala.
There's no better place to explore how fear affects the brain than here at the Navy SEALs Special Warfare.
Okay, so we're not going to watch all of this video. I'm going to skip it to some places where they're explaining things because they're firing guns and things like that, doing some of their training. And the point is that they're talking about how they train the Navy SEALs to manage their fear response. And we showed last time the box breath. So we're just going to skip through this, but you got it right there if you want to click on it and watch the entire thing. And we're just going to watch segments of it.
The Navy turned to neuroscience. When confronted with fear, it's the amygdala that responds to information from our senses and instinctively presses the body's panic button.
The amygdala is actually one of the most interconnected regions of the brain. So it actually will both send signals to parts of the brainstem that now elicit a range of bodily responses. As you start to sweat, your heart races, you might freeze for a while, you might run away.
This exercise, known as the hooded box
Okay, we're not
drill,
going to watch that. We're going to go forward here to this section on the brain. What they've done is some exercises where the soldiers are put in a position of threat and have to make a decision about whether this is genuinely a threat or not a threat in a split second time. And what they're going to show towards the end of this is the 4 psychological strategies that they use to help train the Navy SEALs to have more control over their fear response. And those 4 strategies are the same things that we explore in this class. So we're going to just skip ahead from those training drills that they show you segments of to the neuroscience parts.
press fear that could otherwise make them react the wrong way and get them killed. But how do their brains do that? What scientists discovered is that as humans evolved, another part of the brain, called the cortex, also became involved in processing fear.
The part that makes us most human about the brain is our frontal cortex.
If the amygdala is the first floor, the cortex is the second floor of the brain.
Second floor, but that's okay.
It's the brain's thin, wrinkly outer layer that's divided into 4 sets of lobes.
Pause it here. Okay, they say 4 sets of lobes. What does that mean? Well, I may have blown the pause. There, vision, sensing and motor movement, prefrontal lobes, and we've got down here language and hearing. Okay, language very connected to the prefrontal lobes. Certain parts of language, like hearing words and deciphering them, but your thoughts are mostly running through here. But the ability to have language, it includes a couple of areas that are in these segments of the brain. So that's what these 4 lobes, that's like a map of the curly gray exterior of the brain. And the prefrontal lobes is one of the 4 lobes.
Divided into 4 sets of lobes.
If you unfolded the cortex of a monkey, it would be about the size of a piece of paper. If you unfolded our cortex, it's about 4 sheets of paper large. And the reason it's wrinkly is because you have to squish that all inside of the skull.
The
The
part
frontal
that's way
lobes
bigger
comprise-
for us than the monkey is the prefrontal lobes. And all other mammals, really, except for, dolphins also have a relatively large prefrontal lobes. Octopuses have a large prefrontal lobe. We don't know what they're doing with it. And because we're thinking with it. So what are they doing with it? And then elephants have a larger than, not as large as dolphins and whales, but a larger one.
Is the area just above our eyes, and these are the newest rooms of the brain. As humans evolved, the frontal lobes became the place where conscious, rational thought is processed. It's where we do our problem solving.
The frontal lobes are so interesting because they are really the conductor of the brain. They synchronize all activity.
Scientists made a major breakthrough in fear research when they found that information from our senses reaches the amygdala almost twice as fast as it takes to get to our frontal lobes.
So it reaches the fear center almost twice as fast as the center. And there's been all this a lot of dialogue about police reactions to potentially violent situations. And our police need to be trained, just like the Navy SEALs, on being able to manage these instinctual fear responses, because these responses happen faster than you can think unless you're trained to manage them. We can talk about how that training works later.
The speed of the different brain signals means unless we instinctively know how to react to a potential threat, we may freeze in fear, waiting for the frontal lobes to catch up to figure out the
Or
right
do the
response.
wrong thing, act too fast out of fear, right? So now they put them through this pool training exercise.
Experts believe evolution has hardwired our brains to dread being trapped underwater. As a result, it's almost impossible to control the brain's overwhelming impulse to surface for air. And it's why recruits struggle so much to pass the underwater pool competency test.
Pool comp is a very important milestone in their career here. They're being tested how they can deal with fear underwater. And there is controlled harassment, planned harassment projected at them underwater, and we see how they can cope with that.
Students must spend up to 20 minutes underwater, enduring repeated attacks on their breathing equipment by an instructor. Half of the time, they are without air.
Their air is shut off, their breathing hoses are wrapped around in difficult positions, and they need to respond to those problems with a series of emergency procedures.
Step-by-step instructions for untangling their gear are drilled into the recruits' heads beforehand. They must follow these to the letter. But putting theory into practice isn't easy.
Go down the bottom and the instructors, they come down, they'll start attacking you, taking your mask off, just creating all this stress, and the more that stress builds up, they want to see how you'll handle it.
As the trainee begins running out of air, his brain's amygdala pushes the panic button that urges him to surface. His frontal lobes must win this battle in the brain if he's to stay in control.
Physically, it's very challenging. You have to hold your breath for longer than you normally would. But the instructors just take you kind of to that breaking point to see how you respond.
No sooner has the candidate untied one set of knots than his instructor is back attacking him again and again.
The more that stress builds up, they want to see how you'll handle it. Will you want to go to the surface and get air, which you want to do, or will you take the little air you have and all the problems and solve them and do what's necessary in order to pass the test?
More SEALs fail pool comp at this stage in their training than anything else. The Navy wanted to know what was going on inside their recruits' heads to cause this.
There's almost nothing more scary than not being able to breathe. That creates a tremendous stress response. You have this huge release of stress hormones that make controlling things with thought more difficult.
Under normal conditions, the brain communicates with the body using minute electrical signals. The brain sends out electrical impulses from its nerve cells to others that travel at over 270 miles per hour. This is one way your brain can tell your body to do something. But under extreme duress, the brain releases chemical hormones. The part of the brain that senses fear, the amygdala, triggers a chain reaction that sends adrenaline and cortisol hormones into the body's bloodstream. These stress hormones act as a SWAT team, quickly preparing the body for action. They increase breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. Senses become keener, memory sharper, and the body becomes less sensitive to pain. But even in this heightened state of alertness, pool comp is still too challenging for many trainees.
Your mind is going everywhere, and you're seeing your friends come up from the water they've passed or they've failed, and you're kind of sizing yourself up saying, well, he failed, can I pass, and vice versa. So your mind goes everywhere, and it's key just to stay focused on what you have to do.
Eventually, the student completes the series of tasks and can touch the bottom and then surface to learn from the instructor whether he's passed the test.
I feel fine.
Few SEAL candidates succeed at pool comp the first time. They get 4 attempts, and there's more at stake with each try.
The most common reason for failing pool comp is panic, losing composure underwater. Some of our students, that's it. We will performance drop them from training.
The Navy wanted to help borderline candidates who had the potential to pass these crucial phases in training. After consulting with experts, they came up with a groundbreaking mental toughness program, a set of techniques to boost the trainees' ability to control fear, even in the most extreme situations.
You guys need to stay fired up while you're out there. The pain, the cold, and all that stuff, it's going to eat away at you, but you got to keep going.
The techniques that we're most interested in are what I call the big 4: goal setting, mental rehearsal, self-talk, and arousal control.
Scientists think goal setting works by assisting the frontal lobes. As the brain's supervisor, the frontal lobes are responsible for reasoning and planning. Concentrating on specific goals lets the brain bring structure to chaos and keeps the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, in check.
I got up every morning and I said, I'm going to make it to breakfast. And then at breakfast I said, okay, I'm going to make it to lunch. And then I'm going to make it through the run this afternoon. And then, you take it in these little sort of chunks.
The second technique, mental rehearsal or visualization, is continually running through an activity in your mind. So when you try it for real, it comes more naturally.
If you practice in your mind first and imagine and rehearse how you might do in these stressful situations, the next time in reality you're faced with these situations is actually in effect the second time you faced it. So you'll have less of a stressful reaction.
The third technique, self-talk, helps focus the trainee's thoughts. The average person speaks to themselves at a rate of 300 to 1,000 words a minute. If these words are positive instead of negative, can do instead of can't, they help override the fear signal coming from the amygdala.
The frontal lobes are always on, so it's very easy to think about something difficult, something bad, like I'm going to fail. What am I doing here? I didn't practice enough. What you're trying to do is you're trying to replace those bad thoughts with good thoughts.
The final technique, arousal control, is centered on breathing. Deliberate, slow breathing helps combat some of the effects of panic. Long exhales, in particular, mimic the body's relaxation process and get more oxygen to the brain so it can perform better.
Breathing is a great focusing strategy, but you can only do it so much because in a response to fear, your brain will get jacked up.
On its own, arousal control wouldn't work. The amygdala sends out such a powerful signal, it's tough to suppress if we're still feeling fearful. But combining the 4 techniques made a big difference to the trainee SEAL's pass rate, increasing it from 1/4 to 1/3. The idea of pushing boundaries may not be new, but here is positive proof that you can train your brain, and now science knows how.
Okay, you can see that video demonstrates how the Navy SEALs are actually training pathways from the prefrontal lobes to the limbic system to calm themselves down using the 4 strategies, right? Goal setting, which keeps our frontal lobes and executive center awake, and exercises actually our executive center. So writing down or keeping focused on 1 or 2 goals and having goals is very healthy for us. Visualization, and when you listen to guided meditations, these are a form of visualization to rehearse the neural pathways of what you want to strengthen in yourself. Self-talk is huge, and you can see that self-encouragement is a big part of being able to move forward and succeed, starting with the Navy SEALs and using breath to calm the body. And interestingly, the box breath in particular that the Navy SEAls use when you breathe in 2, 3, 4, and then you hold 2, 3, 4. What they're doing is they're training their reptilian system. They're slowly training their reptilian system to respond to the executive system, and then release 2, 3, 4, and relax. Same when you're not breathing in. You're slowly training the reptilian system, training yourself to have more connection and influence on the reptilian system. Now we're in a green brain, which is basically when our brain is not in stress or fight or flight, not too hijacked. It's fine to feel energizing energy. We tend to be more benevolent toward ourselves and the world. You know, when we're in a good mood, we're all like, if everybody was in a good mood all the time, things would be easier. We'd all get along better, right? We have a much harder time when we're in bad moods. So a lot of what we want to do is cultivate the green brain state, right? Now we rev up to red in order to avoid or deal with threats or to pursue opportunities. Sometimes we need that powerful energy. In red, we're primed for quick action, but we're also primed for more fear, possessiveness, and aggression. When we're upset, anxious, frustrated, irritated, feeling put down or inadequate, we move to the red zone, not the read zone, the red zone. So green mode, when we're in that state of mind, we're more responsive and we have more ability to respond. There's actually more space, we feel more space. When we're in the red zone, we become more reactive because it's designed for quick reactivity. And both of these modes are natural and necessary. We just haven't realized before that we can actually train them. We can train ourselves to be more in green. I want to encourage you now to write down in the chat one thing that puts you in the green. What is one thing that automatically puts you in the green? Okay, now this is from Buddha's Brain, Chapter 2. So it's natural to move back and forth between green and red, which our ancestors evolved to survive and pass on their genes. But what we want to do is cultivate that state that we experience of being in the green. And now you can see why it's valuable to do that. I have no idea where those red lines came from. So self-compassion keeps our brain in the green zone and helps it stay in the green zone, which is the zone of highest functioning. We have improved impulse control and stronger compassion and understanding for others. And we also have a much better, a much broader cognitive abilities. We can be creative, we're more strategic. And you're writing a beautiful list here of things that put you in the green zone, from music to hiking with your dog or playing guitar, quiet time alone, video games, playing with kids. These are all great things. And I really want to encourage you to notice the things this week that put you in green and see if you can start making a list and come up with a list of 20 or more things. And they can be really small, from looking at the oak tree in my backyard, right? So we're going to start to notice the micro, the atomic level things that also put us in green. Our focus this week is what puts us in the green, and we want to strengthen that. So let's see, I think we're getting close. Well, I'm going to have to move quickly now because you can see we've got a few slides to go. So who is the self that we are being compassionate towards? So this slide is just the beginning of this idea because it's a big idea to swallow, but we're basically born with predispositions, what's referred to as nature, right? So traits that are genetic that we've been born with. So we are born with some tendencies, but we can always shape our tendencies. That's what neuroplasticity is. So if we were born a little bit shy, we can expand ourselves to be quite social. And these interact with how our brain responds to and is wired by our environment, nurture. So we're what we've learned to be, whatever our experiences have been, right? And so we wake up now, here I am, in sort of a state like you've been pre-wired to be where you are right now. And this is the card of hands you have to work with. And now you can self-direct some neuroplasticity. So negative self-talk is being in the red zone. So negative self-talk is things like, I can't do that, it's too hard, it's too complicated. And one of the things that we talked about was shifting when you catch yourself, or I'm not good enough, I'll never do anything right. What you want to do is lovingly look, this is another system, just like your reptilian system. You can look with love and compassion at the system of negative thoughts and lovingly shift it over to a more self-supportive language, right? So even though I'm scared of this, I'm going to have my own back. Even though I don't know how to get this done, I'm going to reach out for help and be supportive of myself, right? And all of these things put us into the green zone. Thoughts can be so negative because of the negativity bias of the brain, which tends to over-focus on the negative. So training to green is a training because of the negativity bias of the brain. It's not you. It's the nature of the structures that we inherited, our brain structures that we inherited. And the ego part of our psyche that we'll talk about more looks to sustain our position in the social hierarchy, so can be vulnerable to over-focusing on should and what needs to be done. And these processes run automatically, right? So you're not controlling how they run, but you can influence how they continue to run. You can influence shifting them now that you're aware of them. The voice in the head that we hear starts when children start talking to themselves about age 3, and they practice speech and they absorb, and we develop an entire set of talking in our head that becomes automatic. That's actually referred to as the default mode network, which is a network of automatic thoughts that can pop in, and we can influence that default mode network by how we shape, how we speak to ourselves, and how we approach the negative thoughts with some love and compassion, right? We can be compassionate toward our own negative thoughts. And this slide is just about that you are not your thoughts. You have thoughts, you experience thoughts, and you can direct your thoughts. So you're the one who is aware of your thinking. You can observe your thoughts, and you can't be only what you can observe. You're also the observer. So the main part of you is the part of you that can observe your thoughts. And automatic thoughts are from our default mode network, which absorbs information from the environment about what it thinks we need to do, like we shouldn't do this, or we shouldn't do that, or people should be pretty, or they should be strong, or they should. These kinds of ideas are picked up by the default mode network, and we want cognitive behavioral is all about teasing those thoughts apart and just taking a step back and looking at them and making some sort of executive prefrontal lobe decisions about them, because these kinds of thoughts become habitual, but we can also change them. So the idea of this avatar perspective is the idea of taking a step back and looking, observing what you're experiencing, what your mind is doing, what your bodily systems are doing, and allowing ourselves to be in the growth mindset about this. We inherited where we are, and you're actually in the forefront of the people who are learning ways to manage your own system. So you're in a very exciting place. I want to give yourselves credit for being brave and courageous and noble and willing. I loved reading your reflections in the discussions and learning about you. And that what we're doing then is tending to the self, right? We have a set of patterns that have momentum from our past, from our inheritance. But here's the magic. We can also be aware of and learn new ways of being and slowly train. And by slowly train, it's like training the mind and changing the mind's patterns are very much like when you want to shift from not being in shape to getting into shape. It takes a little bit of time. You do it incrementally, a little bit of time, but it's a skill we can get better at time. So if you have all these me thoughts, we can approach those thoughts with some love. We can let them go with love. We can have compassion for how hard it is to be a being who has these kinds of difficult thoughts. That is you, which also enables you to be compassionate towards others who have those kinds of difficult thoughts, right? So we can tend to our ego with compassion, and that is shifting to green, which entails soothing and calming our nervous system with breath. Let's take a deep breath. In, 2, 3, 4. Open the shoulders and release. Letting go, letting go, letting go, and letting go. So we can learn to calm our mind with supporting, caring thoughts, and it can help to identify a mantra. And it'd be wonderful if you wanted to write out in the chat some mantras, which are simply phrases that you repeat to yourself, that I'm going to share with you, the meta loving kindness phrases that you repeat to yourself that are great to guide your brain. We're like training our brain from, we've got, the brain is already pre-wired and we're like going in and wiring it. So we might wire that I wish for myself to feel relaxed and peaceful today, or I wish for myself to feel relaxed and joyous today. So that is like a mantra, a phrase that we can repeat to ourselves to encourage and help train. And change comes from understanding and encouragement, not from attack. So training to green, self-directed neuroplasticity each day gives us a lot of opportunities to gently notice, acknowledge, and let go of the red zone and pivot or shift to green. And there are lots of different ways that we can do this. And I'm going to run through this little list. And as one of the closing questions for a lecture, I ask you to jot down which of these you're most drawn to practice this week, right? Which one do you want to really practice this week? And you can just use a couple of the words, like the first couple of words from the idea. The first is to listen to yourself, to tune in and become self-aware. And we begin to tune in when we just allow ourselves to take a breath. Let's all do that. Take a breathing in and release. Relax, relax, and relax. And that's a way of tuning in, tending to the systems within ourselves like we would with a garden. And we're going to learn some strategies for doing that in addition to taking deep breaths. Noticing the good, including your own good heart and hopes and intentions, and take a moment to smile at them, to let them sink in, grooving in more deeply those neurons of positive experiences, positive intent, and positive well-being. Practice treating yourself as if you are someone who matters and that you are responsible for. And the more you take better care of yourself, the more you lift your own sort of what you exude, what you bring into the room. I don't want to use terms that sound woo-woo-ish to you like energetic vibration, but we actually do have a measurable vibration that is around us. And and emotions do have a vibratory tone that they exude past us. They're contagious. That's how they're contagious. And so when we treat ourselves well, what we're doing is we're improving our own emotional tone and tenor, which improves other people's experiences of us and lifts them up as well. So one of my great favorite practices for doing this is when I notice myself feeling depleted is, what do I really need right now? What would help me feel good right now? What would help me feel better right now? And then be humble, be gentle with yourself, allow yourself to make mistakes, be loving, kind with your mistakes. Notice how you get better at each of these. You also help other people get better at each of them. When you're able to accept your mistakes and be loving, like, whoopsie, I'm going to try to do better next time, but that's okay. When you approach yourself that way, you help other people when they stumble to be willing to not eviscerate themselves for their mistakes, but rather to learn from them and then to move forward. And then we have a mind training mantra here that we're going to practice, which is a self-compassion meditation. And I hope this link doesn't seem to work, so I'm going to have to fix that. But I'm going to close with this self-compassion meditation. And I know that some of you may have to go, and this meditation will take about 5 to 6 minutes. So before you go, as a way of closing out the quiz, because I did promise that we would go, it looks like probably the fastest I can do these is an hour and 20 minutes, is could you just write down as a way of closing your favorite thing that you learned during this slideshow? And I'm going to run through these things really quick so that you can glance and get a review. What was your favorite thing that you learned today that you want to take with you? We learned about the negativity bias of the brain, which is automatic, that your brain's really complex. It runs through your whole body. The 3-part brain is a way that it is organized, the 3 evolutionary layers of the brain. Here they are, the R complex, the limbic system, and the prefrontal lobes. More detailed slides on the R complex, the limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex. And then we have a stress brain is a red brain. And this is all to make the case for taking good care of yourselves. because as you shift yourself to green, you help shift the world to green, since all of our emotional experiences are basically contagious to the people around us, right? Laughter and anger are two of the most contagious experiences and expressions. So negative emotions are connected to negative thoughts. So, and both emotion and memory influence how we think. So if we're feeling negatively, we remember negative memories, and we have sort of a gray tint on our cognition. We watch the Navy SEALs and how they train with the 4 goals of the Navy SEALs. Goal setting, visualization, self-talk, and using the breath, which is why we use these same 4 goals in this course. In green, we're usually benevolent toward ourselves and the world. We're kinder. We rev up in red in order to deal with threats. That green is our more responsive and holistic mode of the brain, and red is a more contracted and reactive mode of the brain, designed more for emergencies and urgencies. That self-compassion helps keep our brain in the green zone. So when self-compassion is critical to cultivating green. We had a little talk on cultivating who is the self, and this is to help you have some acceptance from about where you are, because it came from here, and then you're like, oh, okay, here I am now I can do some wiring, right? So cut yourselves a break, cut yourself some slack. Okay. Negative self-talk leads us to the red zone. The negativity bias is why thoughts can be so negative. We talked a little bit, and we will talk more about where the voice in our head came from, that our thoughts are not us. We're the ones that can be aware of our thoughts. So we'll be talking about disentangling from those thoughts and not being overtaken by those thoughts, especially the default mode network thoughts. The avatar perspective is a perspective of stepping back so that we can see the bigger picture, and that this is the great value of tending to the self. The mind is a mind of its own. So we gently move it, like we slowly get ourselves in shape. We slowly and gently and kindly get ourselves in shape. We slowly and gently and kindly tune our brain toward the green. And we can tend to our ego with compassion, train ourselves to green. And here are some of the green practices. And now I'm going to do this quiet meditation with you all. For those who can stay, I want to say deep and profound